morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, the latest in our series, The Compliance Process. Today, we will discuss providing proof to your customers. I'd like to welcome Geraldine and Ralph, co-presenting today. We will each provide a little bit of an introduction in a minute or two. We'd also like to welcome our attendees from around the world and thank ICW for hosting this webinar. We would welcome you to actively participate. Please share your questions, comments in the Q&A section. It should be on the right side of your screen, at least it is for me. We believe all lines are muted, but we would also ask that you mute your line just to make sure. The webinar is being recorded. We will send out a link to it. So if you miss a topic or miss something, you will be able to listen to the recording, or you can ask us any questions. Feel free to email us at e-marketing@icw.io with other questions. If there's something you'd like to discuss offline, or if you have any technical issues, please let us know. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. So this is the latest in our compliance process webinar series. We've reviewed an overview of the compliance process, discussed compliance with your supply chain, how to manage and optimize compliance during manufacturing. Now that your business has collected data, information, test reports, verified your processes, how do you share that information with your customers? That is what we will discuss today. And then on July 22nd, we will wrap up this series with a webinar on managing the entire compliance process. So let me introduce myself. My name is Joel PK. I am working with ICW in North America. I have been working within the testing, inspection, certification industry for the past 17 plus years. My standard disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a chemist, I'm not a scientist. I look at compliance from a business perspective. How do we optimize your compliance approaches to manage your business? How do we use compliance to protect your brand, protect your revenue, mitigate the risk to your brand, mitigate the risk of physical injury to your customers? And by taking all of the steps we have accomplished through the compliance process, can you use these as a competitive advantage? In the past, I've worked for companies such as DECRA, Intertech, and Underwriter Laboratories, and look forward to sharing some insight and thoughts today. Let me now introduce Geraldine.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Joel. So yes, my name is Geraldine Koch. Hopefully, a few of you are back again from the last webinars that we've done. So we've got some kind of repeat customers, I guess, which we'll be talking about customers today. But just to recap on who I am. So I am a product safety consultant based here in the UK in London. I have over 17 years of experience in consultancy. The majority of my career was actually at Intertech, where I first met Joel. So he can't get away from me. I keep stalking him. I've trained many people. I thoroughly enjoy training sessions, and I've done a few training sessions today already, actually. And I think one of the key things is it's for the people attending the course. So please do, I encourage, I did just check that the chat was working, so there's no excuses. Even if you've just got a comment that you want to, put in there, so we don't feel so lonely. We have got Ralph today, so we're not as lonely, but please do put any comments or questions, because it's for you. This session is for you to learn. So please do let us know if you want us to talk about anything. Some current activities that I'm working on at the moment, injury data collection, super excited about that. Injury data is such a powerful thing to have when we're looking at product safety. Data in general is so powerful, which is what is great about the ICW systems. I'm also a technical author on the PAS 7055, which has already been released, and another few PASs which are coming out. Super honoured to be working on those. And I also work with the British Standards Institute as a consumer representative. So enough about me. We're probably all excited to hear who Ralph is and his experience. So over to you, Ralph.
Thank you, Geraldine, for that kind introduction. I'm Ralph Thiele, and I'm working with ICW in Europe. Overall, I have 7 years of experience in the quality domain, well, buying and quality domain in retail. With retailers and with importers, so in different tiers of the supply chain. In those years, I've worked on requirements for many items. Here's listed around 1,000. I think it's even more because there's a tremendous amount of items obviously imported these days. I like to see myself as somebody who helps business to simplify their quality processes and procedures, as well as their overall compliance in general. So just like what Joel was saying, I just like to use compliance in the benefits of the company, not against it. Yeah, obviously that's something I love to do. So therefore I'm with ICW.
Perfect. Thank you, Ralph. And we're going to try and keep this webinar very casual, very interactive between the three of us. So it's not just one of us speaking. Also being cognizant of time. The last webinar, I think we ran over a little. So I'm going to try and, at least for myself, keep the pace going. If we go through, or if I go through anything too quickly, please feel free to drop us a note or let us know and we can slow down or circle back. So first comment is, who is ICW? We are a solution house incorporated to focus, made up of compliance experts, data scientists, machine learning engineers who help clients solve the complex challenges of data management, supply chain process management, and predictive analysis. Our team of approximately 60 experts comes from the industry. About 40% come from quality and certification. They have worked for the various global and local laboratories, and the other 40% are software engineers. The team has come together to provide platforms to enable the management of your supply chain process through a SaaS, software as a solution, software as a service tool. ICW today serves 3 out of the top 10 global retailers, and they are companies based in Hong Kong, but as you can see, we have global representation. So we are here to assist you. Go to the next slide. So there are 3 main solutions on the ICW platform. Our compliance and quality management system that allows the collection of compliance data, allows workflow management and supply chain management. We have a marketplace called TickMart to interact with the various laboratories to obtain price quotes, obtain audits, inspections, testing, select and enable interaction with those laboratories where the data can then be uploaded into the compliance and quality management system. Our third solution on the platform is a virtual sourcing tool with over 104,000 suppliers listed today, primarily in the Far East in Asia. So if you are looking for additional components, materials, products, iSource has access and provides virtual access to a wide range of potential suppliers. especially beneficial during a global pandemic. We can go to the next slide. So in a year, just a little bit more background, ICW delivers over 10,000 laboratory searches. We process over 9,000 tests and certifications, reach out to over 1,200 suppliers, although with over 104,000 in our database, that number is actually much higher that we interact with. We provide over 2,000 regulatory compliance consultations and collect and help manage over 80,000 technical files. That will help to share some of the insight that Ralph is going to speak about in a little bit. This is some of the information and where we see trends and monitor what's happening in the industry.
So we're going to have a Menti now. Hopefully last week we warmed you up to the Menti meter. We had quite a few Menti meters, so we've cut that down to just a few this week. We've learned ourselves. So the first question that we have here is, what is included in a technical file? So I just want you to think about that. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to show you how to vote, and I will go through how you vote. So you get your phone as usual. Go your camera. I love it, my assistant. Ralph, where's your phone? You're supposed to join in this fun too. So swipe the camera and you just access the QR code, and hopefully Joel and Ralph are going to tell me that it's working fine, and it's working perfectly. Alternatively, if you don't have a mobile phone, you can just go to menti.com, and if you enter the code, we have the code there, 59580891, and it's a word cloud. So we just want you to answer that question. So in your technical file, what would you expect to find in there? What do you have in your technical files in the moment? Or if you don't have any at the moment, you're not really sure, just have a guess on what you think that might be. I'm going to exit out of that, and hopefully I'm going to go back to this, but I'm going to present it again. So hopefully you can see. Oh, it's brilliant. Okay, so we've got a few coming in. So in a technical file, inspection reports, self-declaration of compliance. There might be a limit on the amount of words you can put in there. Sorry for that. Test report. Yeah. Dimensions, materials. Okay, great. I think this is really interesting because I think this causes a lot of confusion, or it's almost like when you say technical file, it's like people have a different visualization of what that actually is. You know, is it a tangible thing that you have, or where do you keep that? So this is what Ralph's going to talk a little bit more about later on. Okay, specifications are really important in technical files. We give it another couple of seconds to see what else people are putting in. And declaration of compliance, we will speak about. We spoke about that last week. I believe Ralph's got some information in one of his slides on that. Risk assessment. Whoever said that gets a gold star. That's my favorite subject. If you actually have a risk assessment in your technical file, I love you. Really probably inappropriate to say here, but yes, you should have a risk assessment in your technical file. But do people have them in their technical files? They don't often have them in there. They normally panic after and put them in there, but really great if you've got your risk assessments. Product specifications, so important. Packaging artworks, MSDS, like it. EC declaration of conformities, a bill of specification, is that? A bill of BOS? I'm not sure what BOS. Could be technical drawings. Brilliant. This is really great. Any thoughts, boys?
I think what it highlights is there's a lot of information that can go into a technical file, what's applicable, and ultimately the question is, what do you need to provide to your audience, to your clients, your customers?
Yeah.
Which I think opens up the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, there's already some great things in there.
And that's what we're going to talk about today, is customers. So what do we think of? The same thing when you think of technical file. What do you think of when you think of customers? It's funny, I mean, I obviously do have customers, but I think of my children sometimes as my customers because I have to keep them happy. and then I'm happy. But obviously I have clients that are my customers. So when I talk about customers, I think about my clients. And maybe when Joel mentions customers, it might be something else, and Ralph. So that's why the next question, what we want you to do, hopefully, if technology is working amazingly smoothly, on your phone, if you've still got it open or you're still open on the web, you should go on to the next question. And what we're doing here is, I know it's very small on the screen here, but we want to know, who are your customers? It could be all of them, like someone's just put in, thank you. Is it the importer, exporter, or distributor, brand, or retailer? We've grouped that into one. I know that's challenging, but we had a limit on how many we could put in here. Is it manufacturers? Are they your customers? Are suppliers your customers? Or when you think of customers, is it end users or consumers? Or is there something else that we haven't thought about? Please do put it in the chat if there's someone else that's your customers. Yeah, so far we've had 100% are saying all of the above. Okay, which is good.
Just
Give it a couple of minutes for technology. I know sometimes it can be slow, especially when you're attending a webinar. So we'll give it a couple of seconds.
we'll speed up the content after this, the discussion. But this just helps us to guide where we are today and what we can highlight in our upcoming discussion, which is great.
No, at the moment it's still quite unclear.
The positive is at 100%, it looks like everyone is considering all of the different areas for their customers, which
do you think of anything different? I'm sure you guys don't, because we've already made this presentation. So I'm sure there's nothing else you're thinking of, but yeah, I think
I think that's probably pretty accurate, because I always think it's not just my customers, but it's their customers. It's the suppliers, and is there a distributor in the middle or a broker? So the all of the above really does make sense to me.
Yeah.
Should we?
Over to you, Joe.
Okay. So as part of the compliance process, we've discussed compliance in product development, supplier requirements, supplier evaluation and qualification, how you can use audits and inspections, contracting with suppliers, including T's and C's, terms and conditions, to ensure that they will meet your requirements or your customers' requirements. The manufacturing process, how do you both monitor and manage quality control and compliance throughout production? Are you doing random inspections? Are you monitoring the cleaning crew who may touch an assembly line? We touched on that last time. We talk about the collection of all of that data. And what it comes down to is communications. How do we aggregate all of this information and share it with our audience? And who is that audience? Are we communicating it to clients or distributors, exporters or importers, customers, regulators, non-governmental organizations? We need to think about who the audience is and what they are looking for. We need to consider each of these in our discussion, and as the mentee just showed, it seems like most folks on this call are considering that. And to build on the mentee, we can look at what information is required. If you are a retailer, are you looking at just a declaration of compliance that your customers, your suppliers have met the obligations? So if you are selling to a retailer, are they looking for you to provide a declaration of compliance? Are they looking for the data behind it? Do they want to know that there's a lab report? Are they requesting you send that to them, or do they just want to know that you have it readily available on demand in your system? Similarly, if you are a large brand or selling to a large brand, what are they requiring? If you are selling a component or material to a manufacturer, they might require more information. They might want the SDS or the MDS. They may want to know the chemical composition. So what information are they looking at? If they are a manufacturer of soft lines, of apparel and textiles, or you use any fabrics or materials in your product, is there a restricted substance list? For example, the AAFA's RSL. Are there lists that you need to ensure the product meets those requirements? And then ultimately, the end users. How are you communicating that safety to the end users? Is there a requirement to show Prop 65 compliance? Is it a CE mark? And what is the data behind that to give the confidence in the due diligence? The other question I would say, and if everybody can just mute their lines, I'm not sure I'm getting a little feedback. Are you communicating your product? Is it a material, a component, or a finished article? There's going to be different levels of information. If you're providing the material to a manufacturer, they're going to want the chemical composition or proof of compliance test data. If it's a finished good or finished article, it may be that declaration of compliance. So my recommendation is look at it through multiple eyes, multiple viewpoints. That way you take into account everything that is applicable to your business.
An interesting point you just make there, Joel, because it's making me think sometimes you might have dual customers, or in a sense like you're doing something to satisfy one requirement, but you're actually communicating to multiple audiences. And when you think about like the CE mark, like you mentioned, I'm going to ask a question and I hope somebody puts it in the chat, but because of EU exit, there is a new mark. So whoever can tell me what that is in the chat, I will be very proud of you too. And I think that's all that's going to happen. I can't give you a star or a prize. I can't. Clyde, that's it. I can see him there. I knew you'd be there for me. So yes, there is a CE mark, but also in case you didn't know about UK exit, I'm wondering where you've been for the last 3 years, but we have the UK CA mark as well. But what does this mean for the consumer? You know, so I don't know if any of you have ever asked your family at home, or do you know what that means? And they're not really sure, or some people might actually know what it means. Hopefully the consumer knows about the 0 to 3 age symbol, which we can see here on the chart. It really offends me when I see that, and I've seen people edit it and make it like 0 to 8 or 0 to 12. You can't start amending labels and making them your own. Okay, it might be very artistic of you to do that, but it is kind of breaking the law a little bit. Like you can't, there are certain requirements. So the CE mark, I don't know about the height of the CE mark, if anyone knows what the minimum height should be. There are certain specifications on that, and you can't breach that because you could get in trouble. But you're complying with legislation, but you're also informing your customers and other people. You know, trading standards officers, for example. Oh, somebody else, Clyde, you're my hero. He's got the minimum points in the chat, so if you want to see that, he's put some information in there. But also trading standards officers, or if you think about Prop 65, which is enforced by bounty hunters, right, Joel? That always entertains me. So if they're going around into your stores and they're seeing these labels, you're communicating to them whether you know what you're doing or not. And sometimes it's a sign. If you can't get it right, if you start amending the labels or you're not putting the right labels or warnings, it's information for them to then start asking you questions. So it's really important. And an RSL list, as you've mentioned, expiry dates, things on cosmetics, if you've ever noticed it, on how long cosmetics last, and that's for the end consumer. And it's also a legal obligation, and you should include a lot of this in your technical file.
Sometimes I will say it's too much as well. I was in a retail store in the States a number of years ago, it's over 10 years ago, and was walking past the small electronics, a children's little handheld game, and it had ROHS on it, just the 4 letters. I knew what it was. My wife knew what it was because of what I do, but it's funny because anybody else walking through the store would have no idea what that meant, especially in the US, where at that point ROHS was European regulation. So it was interesting. Sometimes it just raises more questions than not. So interesting,
It is. And also that is something. Sometimes people just go around and putting labels on product and then think if they put on everything that they do everything right. But if you put on a ROHS logo, then you're saying basically that you're not knowing what you're doing, because it's not mandatory. It's even a little bit dull to do it. So don't do it. Don't put a ROHS sign on your product, because it will not look good to the authorities.
I love that, Ralph. And do you know what I'm also really impressed with, Joel, is that your wife listens to you. If I speak to my husband about REACH or ROHS, he glazes over. Quite often he'll come back and he'll say, have you finished yet? Anyway, that's how our marriage works for 11 years. But yeah, I love what you said, Ralph. And sometimes it can communicate the wrong message. If you're putting, I've sometimes done this, and I'm sure you all have. Someone's put a CE mark on something, and I've asked them, why have you done that? And they can't answer it, because you are declaring that it complies with a directive. If it's a toy, it's the toy safety directive. If it's PPE, and I think sometimes people miss that. So it's really, really important to know what you're putting on your product, for sure.
Over to me.
Over to you, Ralph. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, we would like to understand, obviously, what a technical file is, because I've just seen, I think, 14 different words come up in the word cloud, but I think that all of those things can be in the technical file, because I think the technical file can also be used as a archive of a certain product at a certain time or a certain batch. So I think that all of those things which were put in there were valid. I think that some only are mandatory and others are not. But if they're not mandatory, it doesn't obviously say that you cannot use them or cannot put them in the technical file, because obviously it is great to keep everything together. So in terms of legislation and law, in the GPSD, the General Product Safety Directive here in Europe, there's a sentence which says that producers shall be obliged to place only safe products on the market. Because of that obligation, we need to make sure that we do that. So obviously we can do that by testing, we can do that by inspecting, and we can do that by a number of other things. For some CE products, such as toys or electronics, it's mandatory, because you need to follow the standards. And if you follow the standard, you test it, you can claim your compliance with the CE mark, just like Geraldine was saying before. But others, for example, like a desk, it seems that it doesn't have any requirements, but obviously all the items need to comply to REACH, for example. So there are still some requirements, but they are not that well defined only. So for every item there's also some mandatory standards and testing you have to do. And obviously those tests you need to store within your technical file. So it basically is a set of documents and test reports that identify the product and prove the compliance with the relevant national and harmonized regulations. So like I just said, if you are having a toy, it needs to comply to the Toy Safety Directive. In that Toy Safety Directive, you are obliged to test. Those test reports you file in your technical file, and the documents that identify the product, but also, for example, the packaging also needs to go in there. Then obviously it is still one requirement which some people do not get all of the time, because some people think that you can just store them for a couple of years, or you can just get rid of them after 2 years or 5 years, or if you're having a new order placed and then the new order replaces the old file. But that basically doesn't work like that, because you have to keep your technical files for at least 10 years after placing the item on the market. So obviously that is something which is challenging. And it is something which is not always easy to do, because obviously you have to store them in a way that you also can find them back after 10 years. And that can obviously be a challenge, but with the Toy Safety Directive, for example, it's mandatory. So it's not even a choice, you just have to do it. On the next slide, basically, we are going to get more into what you store in a technical file. So just touched on why you have to store your technical file and what your the test reports may look like. And we have talked about the fact that all of the things that you have just put in the Menti cloud could also be valid, because you also see in the example that we're giving here that it is just a mix of mandatory and not mandatory reports. Because mandatory test reports, for example, for a steak blender could be the EMC, the LVD, or the RoHS directive. You would also like to look into food contact, because obviously the stainless steel is going to touch your food. The handles need to comply to REACH, and you have other relevant reports like packaging waste directive and other stuff that you need to test. But for example, it could be that a customer asks you to apply the GS logo on the item, which obviously has its own certification. But if you have a GS certification, then it would be wise to also store that GS information, the certificate and the underlying test reports within that same file. That also counts for the fit for purpose test reports. With fit for purpose test reports, I mean the not mandatory reports, but the reports you would like to do to create added value to your product. So for example, it's not mandatory to test if the head of the stick mixer is dishwasher safe. But obviously, it could be that your customer demands it from you. So you test it according to the test standard, which defines dishwasher safe test. And if you're finished that, it's obviously wise to also store that with the other reports in your file. In terms of documents, there are some documents which are mandatory. The product identification, so the numbers, the names, a product photo. A copy of packaging is also mandatory per batch, so not one time for one batch, but for every order, so that you can see also in the future that maybe you've changed the packaging, but you can still see when that went wrong, or when you made changes or didn't make any changes which you shouldn't have made. The instruction manual needs to be in there. The bill of material dash substance. Yeah, sometimes it's a material, sometimes a substance. It is sometimes for a chemical substance and for a product a bill of material. And the declaration of conformity signed by the producer should be also in there. The producer, I say, because if you're an importer within the EU, for example, and your manufacturer is outside of the EU, so in the Far East, then in accordance to the law, the importer is the producer. So you are end responsible for the product and all the damage the product may cause. So the declaration of conformity, the East declaration of conformity, should be signed by the importer, so the one who is responsible for that item. The buying invoice, for example, is something which is not mandatory, but holds a lot of information about that order, and therefore is easy and also handy to put in there. Same social compliance report and the letter of identity. Some people use test reports for some tests of their suppliers, but in their suppliers test report is the supplier's number, so the item number. So to use those reports, you will need to link some way, somehow. So therefore you can use a letter of identity in which the supplier declares that this number of the supplier, which also is written in the test report, is the same item and has the same materials as the item you are buying with your number. So in that case, you are able to link the report in case you're using somebody else's report. Social compliance report also obviously do not say that much about the product, but do say a lot about the facility. And also, if you get questions from your customer, from a retailer, or maybe from an importer, if you're in the Far East, then it obviously proves you are in control if you can just provide all of that information by a click on a button instead of being and searching for a week to find them. And if you have all that in one file together, then obviously it is easier to provide it to your customers than if you have it in different files. In the next slide, I would like to touch on the subject which we've just discussed about what is going in there, because obviously it can be quite a tricky task to know what you have to test for a certain item. So we just had the stick mixer, or we have a hamper storage bag like this, and all of those items have their own requirements. So you can work with laboratories, obviously, to get the information, or you can work with consultants. But we at ICW offer a very simple solution in which you get your requirements within 24 to 48 hours by only uploading a picture, uploading the age group, obviously, or the user who's going to use it, and by providing some information about specs and dimensions. That's always been done between 24 and 48 hours, so you have always a very quick answer, and you're also able to select the lab you want to test with. So it can be ITS or BV or anyone else, but they all will putting forward their thoughts about that item, and you are able to select the best price or the best fit for your company. So the next slide is basically touching on the things that we've just talked about, but more saying something about why you have to keep your files in order, because you have to keep them in order. We've just talked about the fact that if you have a new customer, a retail customer or an importer, that is obviously a very good practice if you can just give them what they need quite quickly, because you obviously have to be sure that you have it in place, and they also want to know that you're in control and have your files in place. But the first thing and the most important thing about all and everything we do with quality is obviously to mitigate risk. So it is obviously very important to keep your files in order and to do it to identify for identification measures in case of risk. So if your product is deemed to be dangerous, you should be able to identify the batch or the lot. The more detailed you do that, the better. And if you are able to separate orders and shipments, you will be able to mitigate the risk for the users and for your business, but also for your consumer or for your customer. Secondly, it's very important, obviously, because of compliance. Geraldine has said it, Joel has said it. You have to be compliant, and not only because you have to be compliant for the user, but you also have to be compliant to protect your business, because authorities are going into stores, checking on labels, checking on manuals, and if your packaging or your manual is not right, they will check further and deeper into your business. So if you are having somebody who is coming in and check your business, it is important that you protect yourself against it. So if you're importing items from outside the EU, which fall within specific safety legislation and regulations, such as toys, electro equipment, and household equipment, like the stick blender, you are obliged to keep those files. And again, you need to keep them for 10 years after placing it on the market. Authority challenges are in Europe every day taking place. In Germany, I think even every hour. So if you are thinking to sell to Germany, then you really have to prepare, because it's a decentralized system that they have there. So every village can do their own controls. So normally in a lot of countries it is centralized. So you have one body who is doing all of the controls with regards to products. But in Germany, for example, it is done per village. So every village can just go into your store. Every town can go into your store and just check your goods and send you a letter about it and demand that you are improving or recalling or do something else. So the government bodies have an obligation to enforce the requirements set. So it's not something that they do because they like it. No, they have to do it. And it's therefore quite possible that your articles will be sampled from stores for checking purposes. The first thing that they will check after they've contacted you is the technical file. So they will ask for it immediately. They will not ask for anything else, maybe for a cup of coffee, but after the coffee, they will go directly to the technical file, because obviously that holds the most information for them. And if you have your files not in order, yeah, then obviously for them it's already a red flag. And if they find a lot of red flags, then it can be obviously that they will audit you, or they put restrictions on your trade possibilities, or I've even seen places where somebody of an authority body was being present for a year at the importer to see everything which happened there. So you just want to keep your freedom. You don't want the government to be in your company every day, all day, to check what you're doing. So by keeping your files in order, that will not happen. Customers and new business is for me a very important thing as well, but the others are more important in terms of risk. But for your company, obviously, and your customers, you have to be prepared to provide what they need. And if you are prepared, it's easier to provide visibility and compliance to your existing, but also your new customers. Because also new customers, even or definitely when it are like the bigger retailers, they just want to see compliance. They want to see that you have your files in order, and they want to see that everything is up to date. So if you are your files are up to date and you are able to send it quickly and in full, it will impress them, and it will be for them easier to work with you than if you're hesitant, or you're waiting, or you're asking and do everything. Obviously, it's fine to ask, but if you know already, it's even better. The next slide. By the way, if you guys just want to add something, yeah, I appreciate that I'm talking a lot, but if you want to add something, or you want to ask in the chat, you can always just ask.
What you're saying is totally resonating with me, and is excellent. I don't know, I'm sure everyone else is agreeing too. And I love the slides and the information. I totally agree. Batch control, and it's red flags. You know, you need to make sure, we've said this throughout these webinars, you have to make sure that your documentation is in check. And the biggest challenge is finding it, right? If I was to actually show you around my room right now, there's a lot of papers that are not filed. And I have a label machine that I've confessed to, but if it's still hard with the filing. But I do love, I've got a bit excited. I've got my phone out because I love a QR code, as you know, and you can, this is a really great example, Ralph, and I'm going to go and see if I can find the information. Everyone else can, right? That's on the webinar. If you go on.
Yeah.
And then we can see, this is an example of how this company has provided information to their customers.
Yeah. So you have to think about obviously the ways in which you want to share your technical files with customers. And Joel also told something about that already before, because I think that Joel is completely right, that the first thing you just want to know, and the first thing you want to get from your customer, also if it's a retailer, you just want to get clarity. So you just want to know what they expect you to do, because if you don't know what they expect you to do, then obviously you can do a lot of wrong things, and you don't want to be doing wrong things, not with new customers. So what do they expect from you? Maybe they have a supplier manual, which they can send you, which you can review. Do they only want a declaration of conformity, or do they want a full technical file? Because a retailer is not obliged to hold the technical file of an importer. So if somebody else is importing an item and is sending it to a retailer, and the importer is also based within the EU, then the retailer is not obliged to keep the technical file, but the retailer is obliged to help ensure compliance with the safety requirements. So they can do that by asking for a declaration of conformity, but if they are going above and beyond, then they can also just request a full technical file. In that technical file, obviously, is a lot of confidential information. So you should also be very clear and also communicate with your retailer what level of transparency they require. Because do you need to share confidential information? Do you need to share factory or trading information, or can you redact that? Is there some kind of an NDA to protect your business? Because obviously I can imagine that you just don't want to give all of your sources to them. But if they demand you to do it, then you have to do it, obviously. So you have to just get clarity. And what Geraldine was showing is even going above and beyond that, because a retailer is not obliged to prove compliance to a consumer. So obviously the importer, so the producer, needs to have the compliance there with a technical file. The retailer then verifies the compliance, maybe by a declaration of conformity, maybe by doing more. But the retailer to a consumer does not have the obligation to check if it is if something is right, because just like what Joel was saying in the beginning, a lot of those symbols and marks and stuff don't say that much to a consumer, because a consumer is just shopping and they think that it is in the store, so it is safe, but they obviously don't know that there's some difference between safe and safe. So they think it's in the store, so it's safe. And you don't have to provide them with a great deal of test reports and documents and all that. But what this importer, for example, is doing, they are putting a QR code to their DOCs on every item they are selling. So they do not have the obligation to do it, but obviously because of the fact they're doing it, they are putting them above anyone else. So if an authority body is going into stores and is seeing this, they think, wow, these guys, they know what they do. They have their files in order. They can even share DOCs with consumers by a QR code. And obviously to your customer, so the retailer, for example, it's great to show that you have that level of confidence, that level of control over your processes, that you are by means to share all that information with the world, because you're confident that everything is right. So this is best practice. This is not something which you need to do. It is just something which you want to share, because of the fact that it's great to do, and it really puts you above the rest if you do these things. So basically, that was my bit, I guess. And now Geraldine is going to tell you something about reach and consumer rights, obviously.
Yeah, so really quickly, you were mentioning it already, what do you need to tell your consumers and what do you not need to tell them? And I think, as a consumer, I think we're pushing a lot. There's a lot of consumer movement where we want to know about everything, especially environmentally and all of that stuff. So there is a lot of a push, but I don't know if everybody knows that under REACH, which is the legislation here in Europe, it's the chemical legislation. I want to try and say it's kind of similar to Prop 65. It's not the same, but I'm just putting it in that spectrum. It's just as complicated, kind of. But actually, under that legislation, the consumer has a right to ask the supplier what's in their product, and they have 45 days to answer. So that is actually a legal obligation where you need to get back to your customers if they ever ask you. So that's something that is out there. And as I've mentioned, there's a lot of information. I was joking with Joel and Ralph that I probably shouldn't put on a presentation, this is rubbish. That's actually come from somebody's website. That's not about this presentation or anything like that at all. But what they're getting to that is that it's not made of rubbish material, and the messages that are out there now, and a lot of websites, they're really claiming, they're making all of these claims, that it's vegan, it's ethically made, and some of them are going to extreme lengths to show that. You go on, you can see a video in the factories, you can see all of this stuff, which I think is great for transparency, but you do need to back up those claims. You can't claim that something is made in Europe and then it's not. That's a really, really bad thing to do. And it's about trust with your customers as well. And it can do a lot of brand damage if you mess that up. So I'm going to pass back to you here, Joe, at this point.
Back to me. So as we think about everything that Ralph, Geraldine, and I've spoken about, how are you collecting that information and how are you sharing it? Are they physical files? Is it data files? When you collect all of this data, how are you converting it to usable information? If you have 10 or 15 test reports or audit reports for a single product, whether it's a mobile phone or a vacuum or even a piece of apparel with buttons or zippers and the textiles, how are you taking all of that data, managing it, storing it, and then converting it to usable information from which you can extract what you need to provide to your customers. How are you communicating it? And if you have all of this data, what are your analytics? How are you monitoring it? And probably the biggest point is accessibility and availability. We operate in a global economy and global world. As my friends in Asia are hopefully sleeping, even though I know we're keeping a few of them up late right now on this webinar, you know, they will need information when I'm sleeping. I need information when they are sleeping. Is the data on a server in a local office? Is it based on a website where it's available to consumers? For example, the QR code, no matter what time or day it is, whether it's a weekend when the office is closed or during the week. So I would challenge everyone to just think in terms of accessibility and availability to your clients, to the end users, but also to your internal teams. With global teams, there's businesses, for example, in the US near my house that are headquartered here, but yet their sourcing is done in Europe and in Asia. How are we ensuring that it's available to all of our in-house teams when they need it, however they need it? If we can go to the next slide. How are you sharing that data? Are you using traditional file sharing methods? Is it a server? Is it an old-fashioned FTP site? Is it a Dropbox? Do you have a SaaS platform, SaaS software as a solution, a website where you can upload the data and it's on a virtual server? Is it an enterprise platform that you've set up? How is your IT department supporting it? And who has access rights? Who can view the data? Who can change it? Who can download it? Are you making it available just internally or also to your clients or the end users? All of these topics or bullets, for lack of better words, should be considered when you build your strategy and your plan. And if we can go to the next slide, just sort of bringing it back to where we started. By doing all of this, everything that Ralph and Geraldine and I've tried to share both today and in the past webinars, it will help you to protect your revenue. You're not going to be at risk of having less risk or mitigating your risk of a recall, which means you can continue to sell. You can show the proof to enter new or existing markets. You can show the proof to build relationships with new distributors, retailers, exporters, importers, or even end clients. It may give you a competitive advantage. It should give you the brand protection, because if you are ever challenged by an NGO, a non-governmental organization, or an enforcement agency, you've got the proof and due diligence to show that compliance. And if we can go to the next slide, want to bring it back to why is ICW hosting this today? Why are we here describing this? ICW's system, the solution, provides the platform for collecting the data, both internally and from your supply chain. It provides the SaaS system to host the information and make it available anytime, anywhere. And that core data platform expands with the virtual sourcing and the interface with the various testing, inspection, and certification labs. Brings it all together in a virtual tool to enable your business to both operate and communicate. And some of the advantages of this are just as we've discussed. ensuring your supply chain and product compliance. The data is in this mass repository. You can pull it up at any time, anywhere. You can collect from global supply chains and communicate with them in a centralized system that provides traceability and trackability, which also could be included as part of that technical file or due diligence. It provides economic sourcing, and because the data is converted into usable information through AI, artificial intelligence, OCR, and other means, it enables the reporting and analytics so you can assess where there are challenges, where there is risk, and where there's opportunities to maybe use it as a competitive advantage. With that, we've tried to take today's webinar a little bit faster pace so we didn't run out of time. I would also, before we get to any questions that may be there, I would invite you to join us for the last in this series of webinars, Managing the Compliance Process, on July 22nd. I'm sure Geraldine, Ralph, myself, and the rest of the ICW team will come up with some additional webinars. So we won't end July 22nd. It'll be just the last in this series, in this topic set. And with that, Geraldine, Ralph, any final comments or thoughts?
Just thank you. And I thought it was a really great presentation. It's great to have you on board, Ralph. I think Joel and I, obviously, we did great jobs before, but it's great to have you here. Clyde has been the star attendee. I'm sure I will see you at some point soon, Clyde, and I can give you a gold star in person. But he did mention, I think this was interesting to mention, that it is really difficult. Love the QR code example, which I think is great. But it can be quite challenging to do that, to add it in with all of the artwork processes and everything else. But I think, you know, there are a lot of challenges. Of course there are. But,
and it was interesting. I did receive a comment by one of our attendees, the language barrier with the QR codes. So if you're presenting it, is it in Dutch on the website? Is there a Dutch or English? Is there a Mandarin option? So it's a great point. I won't name the person, but thank you. It's a great point to mention that when you communicate all of the information, you have to make it available in the broadest languages possible, depending on where your customers or the viewers are going to be sitting.
Yeah. I also think that the challenge with what Clyde is mentioning about, you know, implementing this in large businesses and stuff, it is actually a big challenge. But that, again, that just stresses how much you're in control if you can do it. Because also authorities know that it is very challenging. Customers know it's challenging. Anybody who is in the supply chain knows it's challenging. So if you can do that, it just shows some muscle, you know, like I'm able to do this and the others are not.
Yeah, it really is a competitive advantage, isn't it? And I think what's another interesting point we've been speaking about is what you're intending to communicate, but then actually what is coming across that you're not intending, so that basically you don't know what you're doing. So be really, really careful in how you're communicating that to your end users, to your customers, whoever they are.
I see a question based on what you're describing of the competitive advantage, and I'll answer it this way: is if a retailer or customer has a choice between two products or two suppliers, your business is one of those suppliers, if you can show them that you have all the information to show compliance, your competitor does not, that will provide a competitive advantage to you if the products are similar. So I think it's a great question. And Geraldine, the comments you made highlight how this can be used as an advantage. So I'd like to, I know we are out of time here. So once again, on behalf of Geraldine, Ralph, and myself and the ICW team, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Please feel free to visit the website, icw.io. Email us at e-marketing@icw.io if you have any questions, would like to discuss any topics further. And with that, we will wish everyone a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.